So in this video, we're going to cover coterminal angles and quadrantal angles, okay, and then we're going to calculate coterminal angles both in degree form and in radian form, okay? So first off, let's define what coterminal angles are. All right, so two angles are coterminal if they are both in standard position and their terminal sides are the same, okay? In order to calculate coterminal angles, you're either going to add or subtract 360 degrees or add or subtract 2 pi radians to the angle measure that you're given. Okay? Quadrantal angles. Angles in standard position that have terminal sides on either the x-axis or the y-axis. Okay? A couple of examples. 270 degrees would have a terminal side on the lower part of the y-axis, and pi over 2 radians would have a terminal side on the upper part of the y-axis. Okay? Another way to think of this, quadrantal angles would be multiples of 90 degrees or pi over 2 radians. Okay, so we've got 30 degrees here. We want to find two coterminal angles, one that's positive and one that's negative. Okay, if an angle is quadrantal, make sure you note that to the side. So 30 degrees, obviously not a quadrantal angle. It's not a multiple of 90. All right, so first thing, we can add 360 degrees. So 30 degrees has the same terminal side as 390 degrees, okay? Now let's subtract 360 to find a negative one. So 30 degrees minus 360 is negative 330. So all three of these angles, 30 degrees, 390 degrees, and negative 330 degrees, would all have the same terminal side. So they're going to be in the same exact location in the coordinate plane, okay? Let's move on to number 4. 180 is a quadrantal angle. It's a multiple of 90 degrees. Okay, the terminal side would be on the negative side of the x-axis over here. Okay, so finding a couple coterminal angles first, we want to add 360, which would give us 540. So 180 and 540 would have the same terminal side. Let's subtract 360. So a negative angle that would be coterminal to both of these would be negative 180. Okay. Let's move on to 225. Not quadrantal, obviously, not a multiple of 90. So we're going to add 360, which gives us 585 degrees. We're going to subtract 360, which gives us negative 135 degrees. So these three angles are all coterminal. Okay. Now let's move on to radians. Okay. So here we're going to add or subtract 2 pi to the given angle measure to find coterminal angles. So pi over 3. So we're going to add 2 pi. Well, we've got a fraction here. We don't have a fraction here. In order to combine fractions, we obviously need a common denominator. So I'm going to convert 2 pi into a fraction that has 3 in the denominator. So that would be 6 pi over 3. So now I can combine these. So that would be 7 pi over 3 radians. So pi over 3 and 7 pi over 3 are coterminal. Subtract 2 pi. Again, we want to get a common denominator. So I'm going to subtract 6 pi over 3 from pi over 3, and that gives me negative 5 pi over 3 radians. So these three angles in radian measure all have the same terminal side. Okay, 5 pi over 6, we're going to add 2 pi. Okay, get a common denominator. So 17 pi over 6 would be coterminal to 5 pi over 6. Subtract 2 pi, get a common denominator. So 5 pi over 6 minus 12 pi over 6 would be negative 7 pi over 6 radians. So again, these three angles all have the same terminal side. And finally, 3 pi over 2. Well, this is a multiple of pi over 2, so that's quadrantal. Add 2 pi, get a common denominator. So 3 pi over 2 plus 4 pi over 2 is 7 pi over 2. And then let's subtract 2 pi, get a common denominator, and that would be negative 1 pi over 2. So 3 pi over 2, 7 pi over 2, and negative pi over 2 are coterminal angles.